With respect, you're wrong.
He was one sentence away from destroying both their careers on live television. 10 weeks earlier, these two chefs couldn't stand each other. Now Choi Jin stood in front of 300 people, about to say the one thing that wasn't in the script. With respect, he said, "You're wrong." The room went dead silent. Moyohara couldn't feel her hands. She had no idea what he was about to say next, and neither did the judges, the producers, or the 300 people holding their breath in that studio. This is how a fake marriage, built for a reality show, turned into something neither of them saw coming. 10 weeks earlier, it started with a video that ruined Moyohara's morning, and a secret Choi Jin had been keeping for 4 years. If you're new here, welcome to Afro Diaries by D. Don't forget to subscribe because in about 10 minutes you're going to find out Choi Jin has been lying about why he wanted this marriage for 4 years. And you won't want to miss the moment Moyohara finds out too. Moyohara ran her kitchen the way her grandmother had taught her to run it, in silence, with intention, like every dish was being handed down rather than simply cooked. Her restaurant, Min's Table, sat on a quiet street with tall windows that let the morning in, and inside those windows nothing was ever rushed. She believed a good broth could not be shouted into existence. She believed most modern chefs had confused spectacle for skill. And she believed, with the particular certainty of a woman who has spent 15 years proving people wrong, that Choi Jin, 2 blocks away, 1 star louder, always somewhere on a magazine cover with his sleeves rolled up, was the walking proof of everything wrong with the industry she loved. She was mid-slice, a text from her agent still glowing on the counter, when her phone buzzed with the video that would ruin her whole morning. Jin, in his restaurant canvas, holding up a single glowing droplet of something he was calling gochujang, turned into a tiny ball that popped in the mouth, grinning at the camera like he had personally invented flavor. He has ruined a great old dish, Hara thought, watching the little ball of gochujang burst on screen. Her grandmother would have said the same thing, had she lived to see it. Hara could still hear the exact tone she'd have used, dry and unimpressed, the same tone she'd used on every shortcut Hara had ever tried to take in that kitchen as a girl. Hara agreed completely. She always did. What she did not know that morning, what nobody watching that video knew, was that 2 blocks away, Choi Jin had already spent 4 years building an entire imagined version of her out of interviews and rival food festivals, and that the audition he was about to walk into that same afternoon had very little to do with talent, and everything to do with a request he had made to a producer 3 weeks earlier that he had told exactly no one. Hold on to that, it matters. His restaurant canvas was 2 blocks from hers, and Hara had spent 4 years finding that unbearable in a way she'd never quite examined. She couldn't buy milk without seeing his face at the checkout, forearm flexed over some ruined bulgogi dressed up as art. They'd been rivals since culinary school, 2 chefs circling the same small pond, seemingly destined to collide. She believed in coaxing flavor out slowly. He believed in shocking it into shape with a blowtorch and a tank of liquid nitrogen. She had a name for him privately, that she used more often than she'd admit, the fraud with good hair. She could trace the whole rivalry back to a single night, 5 years earlier, at a food festival neither of them had wanted to admit meant anything. She'd been 29, presenting a dish she'd worked on for months, and Jin, younger then, hungrier, not yet famous, had set up his station directly across from hers, close enough that the smoke from his torch drifted into her plating area all night. She'd assumed it was a stunt, an attempt to throw her off in front of the judges. She had complained about it to anyone who would listen for a full year afterward. It never once occurred to her, standing there furious with chilly smoke in her eyes, that a man looking for a rival would have picked any other table in the room, and that the only station close enough to bother her all night had been, very specifically, hers. That detail, too, would matter later. Seoul was full of tables he could have chosen. He had chosen the one next to her, every single time for 5 years and called it coincidence. The audition room was exactly the chaos she'd braced herself for. Chefs in crisp coats trying not to look nervous, elbow to elbow with people they'd normally never share a kitchen with, all of them pretending to check their phones instead of watching each other's plates. Hara recognized a handful of faces from festivals over the years, chefs she respected, and chefs she privately thought had no business holding a knife on television, and she kept her own expression carefully unreadable the entire time, the way she'd trained herself to do in every professional kitchen since she was 19. 3 judges sat behind a long table, wearing the specific boredom of people who'd already decided most of the day wasn't worth their attention. Judge Yoon, a food writer everyone knew was close with Jin. Beside him, a Michelin chef visiting from Paris who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. And in the center, PD No, the show's producer, a woman with a shark's smile and eyes that seemed to already know exactly how much was in your bank account. Hara plated her gujjalpan, 9 small dishes arranged with thin pancakes to wrap them in, the kind of dish that rewarded patience and punished shortcuts, and watched PD No's smile widen into something like real approval. "Chef Moyo," PD No said, "exquisite true skill." Hara let herself feel, for exactly 4 seconds, that this had been a good idea. Then Jin walked in, all black denim and a smile too perfect to trust, and made an oyster shell breathe a curl of pine-scented smoke. The judges ate it up, the way they always did. Hara stood at the edge of the room cataloging every reason she disliked him, feeling each one confirmed in real time. What she noticed, what she would only understand the full weight of much later, was that when his eyes found hers across the room, his smirk flickered just once into something closer to nerves. She read it as arrogance. It was not arrogance. PD No gathered the finalists under the studio lights an hour later and announced, with the delight of a woman who already knew exactly how good this would be for ratings, that Moyo Hara and Choi Jin would be joining the show that season not as rivals but as its central couple, married, on camera, for 10 straight weeks. The room gasped. Hara's whole body went cold. Somewhere in the noise, a staff member pressed a contract into her hands, and her agent was already on the phone negotiating a bigger number. And Jin, standing a few feet away, did not look nearly as ambushed as a man should have looked, learning this for the first time. Nobody noticed that, not yet. Soo-jin explained the terms in the back of a car stuck in traffic, scrolling a tablet balanced on her knee like this was any other Tuesday. 10 weeks, shared apartment, joint press, and a morality clause. If either of you gets photographed with anyone else, the network can pull the show and sue you both. "I don't want any of this," Hara said, watching the city crawl by. "Men's table lost money again last quarter," Soo-jin said, gently, which was somehow worse than her usual bluntness. "I didn't tell you before the audition because I needed you sharp, not scared. This isn't a vanity project anymore, Hara. It's what keeps the lights on." Hara said nothing. Her mind had gone quiet too, which felt worse than an argument would have. "You don't have to like him," Soo-jin went on. "You don't even have to be nice to him off camera. God knows you two never have been. Just don't let anyone catch you wanting to kill him. 10 weeks. Then you never have to see Choi Jin again." 10 weeks. Hara turned the number over like a stone in her pocket, wearing it smooth with how many times she would end up touching it. She called Soo-jin again that same night after the car had dropped her home, needing to say the thing out loud to someone who wasn't currently living inside it with her. "I don't hate him the way I'm supposed to," she admitted, quiet, like the words might get her in trouble. "I hate that I don't hate him. That's different. That's worse." "That's television," Soo-jin said, not unkindly. 10 weeks in close quarters with anyone interesting tends to do that. Doesn't have to mean anything. "It's Choi Jin." "I heard you the first time." A pause, softer than her usual brisk delivery. "For what it's worth, Hara." You've spent 4 years being furious at a man for existing 2 blocks from your restaurant. Furious takes energy. I've always wondered what you'd do with that energy if you ever stopped pointing it at him and started asking what it actually was. Hara didn't have an answer for that. She hung up before Soo-jin could hear her, not having one. The apartment they were given looked like it had been decorated by someone who had once seen a magazine, white leather couch, chrome fixtures, one sad orchid on a glass table, all of it staged for a marriage neither of them had asked for. Except, technically, one of them had. Hara set her knife bag down hard enough to make a point. Jin dropped his duffel bag on the couch like he already lived there, opened the enormous refrigerator, found no beer, and shut it again with quiet betrayal on his face. "Rule 1, Hara said. You're half of the apartment, my half. We share nothing the contract doesn't strictly require." "There's only one bedroom," Jin said, and something in the way he said it made her wonder, half a second too late, whether he'd known that before she did. "Fine, you take the couch." He pushed off the counter and closed some of the distance between them. "Look, Hara, I don't want this any more than you do, but there's a prize on the line and both our careers, and if we get sent home in week 1 because our chemistry looks like a hostage situation, neither of us wins anything." He wasn't wrong, which annoyed her more than if he had been. Up close, she could see a small scar cutting through his left eyebrow, his eyes dark and direct in a way that felt strange for a man who'd built his whole career on smoke and misdirection. "So we need rules," he said. "On camera, we're a real couple. Off camera, you stay on your side of the kitchen, I stay on mine. Don't touch my knives. Don't tell me how to cook." "As if I'd take cooking advice from a man who thinks chili paste belongs in a spray bottle," she said. "Same goes for you. My side is sacred. Yours can be whatever science experiment you like. Just keep your foam away from my pots." "Deal," he held out a hand. She looked at it like it might bite her. "What are you doing, Hara?" she asked herself, and did not have an answer ready. She ignored the hand. "We're business partners, Choi Jin, nothing else." She turned toward the hallway, already retreating. "Right now I'd like to go to my room and pretend you don't exist." "Whatever you say, darling," he called after her, dropping onto the couch, feet up on the glass table, phone already out. The apartment went quiet except for the hum of the city below and the loud, humiliating pounding of her own heart. Somewhere underneath the anger, a small and treacherous part of her had noticed the line of his neck and the easy way he sat there, and had filed it under a category she refused, that first night, to name. What Jin did not say, sitting there with his feet up and his face carefully arranged into indifference, was that he'd spent 3 separate meetings convincing PD no this pairing would work, using every argument except the real one. He told himself it was strategy. He told himself a great many things that week, most of them lies of the useful kind. Morning brought the first real clue, though neither of them would have called it that yet. Hara woke to the smell of coffee made exactly the way she liked it, an obscure roast she'd mentioned once, in an interview 2 years earlier that had barely cleared 10,000 views. She drank it anyway. She did not ask how he knew. She would think about that coffee for a long time. "Peace offering," Jin said, not looking up from his phone. "Figured we'd need caffeine to pretend we're in love for 12 hours today." They fell, without either of them planning it, into small domestic rituals that had nothing to do with the cameras at all. He took over the coffee, permanently. Once he learned she wouldn't drink anything he hadn't made himself, which she told herself was about quality control and had nothing to do with anything else. She started leaving him notes about which of his ingredients she'd moved and why, sharp little corrections signed only with her initials, and he started leaving notes back, defending his methods in handwriting far neater than she'd expected from a man who threw powders around for a living. Neither of them called it a routine. It became one anyway, the way real ones do, not announced, just accumulated, one burnt piece of toast and one perfect cup of coffee at a time, until the apartment that had once felt like a stage set started, almost against her will, to feel faintly like somewhere she lived. Their first assignment, a grocery run, filmed handheld to look candid, put them in a market crowded with strangers half pretending not to film them anyway. It should have been unbearable. Instead, somewhere between an argument over pre-chopped garlic and a stranger asking for a photo with the newlyweds, Jin made her laugh, a real one, surprised out of her, and a woman by the vegetables gasped like she'd witnessed something holy. He tried twice to sneak a bag of gummy candy into the cart. She put it back once. She let it stay the second time, on the grounds that fighting over candy on national television seemed like a poor use of their limited goodwill. He noticed the concession without commenting on it, which she found, against her better judgment, more charming than if he'd made a show of winning. They argued their way through the rest of the list, whether frozen dumplings counted as a legitimate pantry staple or a personal failing, whether his insistence on a specific brand of sesame oil was genuine preference or brand loyalty dressed up as expertise. And by the time they reached the register, the production assistant trailing them had stopped bothering to whisper stage directions, because the two of them, entirely without meaning to, had started behaving like people who actually knew each other. Near the fish counter, a man in a golf visor asked for a photo, congratulating them on a wedding that never happened, and Jin slid an arm around her waist without missing a beat, his thumb pressing once lightly against her hip. A private signal. Play along. She smiled like her life depended on it because in a professional sense it did. Camera still rolling, he said afterward, though the camera operator had wandered off 3 full minutes earlier. Is it? She said. Neither of them mentioned it again. She thought about it for the rest of the day anyway. That night, unable to settle, Hara found herself standing at the tall windows of Min's table long after closing, the way she had 100 nights before, looking out at the small yellow glow of canvas 2 blocks down the street, still lit, still open, Jin's silhouette moving behind the glass long after his own last table had gone home. She had always told herself she watched because she was checking on the competition. She had never once asked herself why checking on the competition required standing at the window for 20 minutes with the lights off behind her, so no one looking back could tell she was there at all. She did not know that night that 2 blocks away, Jin had developed the exact same habit in reverse and had never asked himself the question either. The wedding photo shoot came 2 days later, staged inside a fake Tuscan villa built out of foam, board, and desperation. They put Hara in a gown that clung to every curve, and Jin in a suit that did absolutely nothing to help her concentrate. "Dip your bride," the photographer shouted, buzzing with manic energy. "Like you just said I do and you're carrying her over the threshold." Jin's hands found her waist, warm and steady. He bent his knees, focus absolute. "Smile like you mean it, Moyohara," he whispered, "or I'll tell everyone you secretly watch videos of Bobby's tasting lemons." Her smile turned into bared teeth. "You wouldn't." He dipped her low, and for one horrifying second her whole body relaxed into him, the strong line of his chest, his hand splayed steady between her shoulder blades, the faint clean smell of his skin. Safe somehow, though it had no business being safe. His eyes, always so full of that infuriating confidence, went soft for exactly 1 second. Click flash. She scrambled upright, fixed her dress, put a much-needed foot of air back between them. For the final shot, the photographer told them to stop posing and simply look at each other, so they did. The crew disappeared. The cheap set disappeared. It was just the 2 of them, tired and stripped of their usual armor for one long, unscripted second, and something passed between them that neither of them could name. It wasn't rivalry. It wasn't the old annoyance. It was recognition, quiet, unsettling, and for one very inconvenient moment, entirely real. That night, after the crew had packed up the fake ivy and gone home, Jin sat alone on his half of the apartment, phone dark in his hand, replaying the moment the photographer had told them to stop posing and just look at each other. He'd spent 4 years perfecting the art of not being obvious about anything. One unscripted second under studio lights had nearly undone all of it. She can't find out, he thought, not for the first time and not, he suspected, for the last. Not the real reason. Not yet. Maybe not ever if he was smart about it, if he kept doing what he'd been doing for 4 years, wanting her from a careful, deniable distance, close enough to watch, far enough to still call it rivalry with a straight face. He was not, it would turn out, going to be smart about it. But that night, he still believed he might be. He told himself, lying awake on a couch he'd claimed out of stubbornness rather than comfort, that 4 years of restraint had to count for something, that a man who had kept a secret that long could surely keep it another 10 weeks. He was, in this one specific area of his otherwise disciplined life, spectacularly wrong, and some quiet, honest part of him already suspected it. The next few tasks became a tightly rehearsed act. On camera, they moved like a single perfect team. She'd wipe sauce off his cheek. He'd steal a taste from her spoon and call it genius, and the internet turned Soul Perfect pair into the week's top trend. Off camera, it was a quiet, ongoing war, conducted entirely in whispers 10 feet from a rolling camera. The confessional chair became the place they each aired what they refused to say directly to the other's face. Working with Jin, Hara told the camera, arranging her expression into something diplomatic, is an experience. Leave the man alone for 5 minutes and he'll try to set his own shoelaces on fire. Also, he alphabetizes his spice rack. A man who cooks with a blowtorch and he can't handle a jar out of order. My ancestors weep every time he puts foam on a plate. Jin in the same chair, looking far too relaxed. Hara's the real deal. Watching her hands work is like watching a surgeon who also plays piano. She still quotes her grandmother mid-service, like the woman standing right there checking her knife angles. I've started leaving out an extra bowl at family meal just in case. He grinned straight at the lens. She thinks I don't notice. I notice everything. I bet he does, Hara thought, watching the clip later. The man needs a leash and a nap. And for some infuriating reason, hearing him call her the real deal sent a spark of pride through her chest that she had absolutely no use for. Not every day on the show was a challenge, a photo shoot, or a fight. Some days were simply Tuesday, and it was on one of those unremarkable Tuesdays, caught in a sudden downpour walking back from a supply run with a single umbrella between them, that Hara learned something about Jin no camera crew had thought to film. He held the umbrella wrong on purpose, tilting it toward her until his own shoulder was soaked through, and when she pointed out that he was, technically, failing at the one job of an umbrella, he just shrugged and said some things weren't worth doing efficiently. They walked the last 2 blocks like that, him half-drenched and pretending not to notice, her fighting a smile the entire way, and nothing about it made it into any episode. It was the kind of afternoon that didn't announce itself as important. It simply happened, quietly, the way real things do. And by the time they reached the apartment, both of them understood, without saying so, that the ease between them had stopped being an act sometime in the last 20 minutes, and neither had noticed the exact moment it happened. Then came the challenge that cracked something open for good: dinner with the in-laws. Actors playing Jin's parents in front of a live studio audience, treated with the full seriousness of a real family occasion. Prepping side by side, Jin told her quietly about his actual mother, 30 years running a street food stall near Dongdaemun, a 2-hour bus ride to his restaurant's opening night, tears into a napkin over a bowl of soybean stew dressed up fancier than she'd ever imagined it could be. Why the spectacle then? Hara asked, honestly curious for the first time in 10 weeks, if that's where it started. Because plain doesn't get you a table at Canvas, he said. It gets you a market stall, which is beautiful, but it's not what people expect when they're paying that much for dinner. I found a way to sell my mother's cooking to people who'd never have walked into her stall. I just had to wrap it up fancy enough that they couldn't tell what they were really eating. He glanced sideways at her. Your turn. Why does every dish of yours have to be exactly like it was 200 years ago? Because someone has to remember it, she said, before she could stop herself. My grandmother taught me Jollof on a wobbly folding table in a 1-room apartment. She used to say a recipe is the one thing no one can ever take back from you. If I change it, I lose the thread that connects me to her. That's the real reason, Jin said, not the one you give the judges. He didn't say anything else about it, which she appreciated more than she let on. Somewhere in that kitchen, a door neither of them had noticed was locked came open a crack. Neither one tried to shut it again. The pressure outside the apartment was building faster than either of them had clocked. A photographer camped outside Min's table for 3 straight mornings, and Hara's head server, a steady woman named Yoonjae who had worked the floor for 6 years, pulled Hara aside before service one evening with the particular worry of someone who had watched the reservation book thin out, and then, suddenly, fatten back up. "Bookings are up 40% since the show started," Yoonjae said, "which is good. It's also strange because half of them are asking specifically whether Chef Choi will be in that night, which he obviously will not be because this is your restaurant, not a theme park." She hesitated. "I only mention it because I don't think you understand yet how much this show has already changed things here. People aren't just coming for the food anymore." Hara had nodded, said something reassuring, and gone back to her station without letting herself sit with the actual weight of it. That Min's table, the place she had built out of her grandmother's folding table and 15 years of stubbornness, now owed a piece of its survival to the very rivalry she'd spent years being furious about. It was not a comfortable thought. She filed it away with the rest of the things she wasn't ready to examine. If you're still with us, you already know this is the kind of story you'll want to tell someone. Stay close. It gets harder before it gets good. Winning became a rhythm, a heartbeat pushing the whole ridiculous arrangement forward. The night they took first place for their fusion dish, his smoke technique married to her braised short ribs, an argument that turned, with 30 minutes on the clock, into the best thing either of them had made all season. Something shifted for good. 2 nights later they won again with a stuffed sweet pancake that made Judge Yoon tear up on camera, and Hara found herself, unable to sleep, walking out onto the balcony where Jin was already standing, staring at the river he'd complained about for 2 straight weeks. She brought rice wine. She sat down without asking. "Couldn't sleep either," he said, not a question. "You're doing better than you think you are," she said, pouring 2 glasses. "That sugar worked tonight, even I'll admit it." Careful Chef Moyo, compliments this early aren't in the contract. He turned the glass once before drinking. "Where do you go when you're plating? You get this look, somewhere else entirely." "My grandmother mostly. She watched the lights on the water. She used to stand behind me at a folding table in a 1-room apartment and correct my knife angle without even looking up from her own work. I was 7 the first time she taught me Jollof, and 40 the last time I plated one without hearing her say something about it in my head. It's easier some nights than admitting I just miss her." He was quiet a moment. "I don't have anyone in my head like that. I have a mother who calls mid-shift to ask if I've eaten, and a habit of setting things on fire when I don't know how else to say what I mean." He glanced at her sideways. "I used liquid nitrogen on my final project in cooking school because I was too scared to plate something simple and let people judge it on taste alone. Simple has nowhere to hide. And now the smoke's less about hiding and more about translation. Not everyone grew up with a grandmother teaching them a fancy platter on a folding table. Sometimes it's just how I get people to sit still long enough to taste what I'm actually trying to say." She thought about that longer than she meant to. 4 years of calling him a fraud with good hair, and it had never once crossed her mind that his kitchen might be its own kind of inheritance, spoken in a language she'd refused to learn. "For what it's worth," she said finally, "that fusion dish wasn't hiding. That was the best thing either of us has made all season." Something open moved behind his eyes before the familiar smirk covered it back up, slower this time, like he wasn't fully sure he wanted to hide it at all. "I've spent 4 years reading about you in the same magazines that write about me," he admitted. "Built a whole person out of paper, Turns out the paper version was nowhere near as annoying as the real one. High praise. The paper version didn't laugh at bad jokes about bread, looked back out at the river instead of at her, which was its own kind of confession. The real one does, even when she's trying very hard not to. She didn't have a comeback ready for that, which was, in itself, new information about herself she wasn't sure what to do with. They sat there until the bottle was empty, and the sky over the river turned from black to the gray that meant call time was 3 hours off, neither of them saying what this was becoming, both equally unwilling to be the one who said it first. The network, sensing a moment, booked them onto a live talk show in front of 300 people who had decided their fake marriage was the most important thing happening in the country that week. The host brought up the now viral pantry clip, a private moment from backstage that had somehow become public, Jin's hand brushing a tear from her cheek in a corner he'd thought no camera could reach. "Only that the internet has a wild imagination," Jin said, easing the moment back into something safer for both of them to survive on live television. "We were tired. It happens on a cooking show. It's not always a soap opera." The host laughed, a little disappointed, and moved on. Backstage, out of earshot of the crew, Jin still hadn't let go of her hand. "That was close," Hara said. "I know," he said, and didn't explain further. Neither did she. The ultimate fusion challenge nearly ended them. Jin wanted to turn bibimbap into crumbled soil. Hara called it gardening, not food, and dragged him into the pantry to say so. "It's about texture, a new take on a classic," he argued, low and sharp. "My cooking is the ground your trendy nonsense is built on," she snapped back. "Don't you dare call my work a museum piece." The fight burned 30 real minutes off the clock, both of them retreating to opposite ends of the station, working in the specific silence of two people too angry to say anything productive. Hara's knife hit the cutting board harder than it needed to, each strike a small argument she wasn't finished having out loud. Across the station, Jin swore under his breath at his sugar work, at the humidity, at the clock, at anything that would hold still long enough to be blamed. Both their dishes fell apart at once, her broth flat from anger, his sugar work shattered on the counter. Something in the wreckage forced a silent, frantic truce. His smoke saved her broth. Her doenjang gave his ruined candied nuts a purpose. Their hands moved fast, their bodies weaving around each other in a dance neither had practiced but somehow already knew, shoulders bumping twice with neither stopping to apologize, both too focused to spare the breath. The kitchen filled with smoke and steam, and the sharp, layered smell of tea and soybean paste and rendered fat. And somewhere in the middle of it, Hara reached past him for the tongs and caught the clean, warm scent of his skin underneath all of it, and lost half a second she absolutely could not afford to lose. What came out of that kitchen wasn't his dish or hers. It was neither of them, and it was both of them, and when the judges closed their eyes over the first bite, Hara turned to find Jin already looking at her the exact same way he had at the wedding shoot, except this time there was no photographer telling them to stop. She smiled, not for the cameras, not for the judges. "Oh no," she thought, "I am in so much trouble." She noticed it that same night, packing up her station, Jin, 3 feet away, reading something on his phone with an expression she'd never seen on him before, something closer to worry than his usual easy calm. He caught her looking and put the phone away too fast, turned the win into a joke about the judges' faces, and steered the conversation somewhere else entirely. She let him. She also didn't forget it. 2 days later, PD No pulled Jin aside for a private conversation that ran long enough for Hara to notice the length of it from across the studio. Whatever was said, he came back to their station quieter than usual, and when Hara asked, lightly, what that had been about, he told her it was nothing, scheduling, and changed the subject before she could push. It was the first time in 10 weeks she'd caught him giving her a smooth, practiced answer instead of a real one, and something about how easily it came to him stayed with her longer than she wanted it to. The backlash came fast. the way it always does once the internet decides it has an opinion about two people it has never met. One outlet called their chemistry the only honest thing on television that year. The same outlet, 4 hours later, called them a couple built for engagement. A third ran a side-by-side comparison of every touch, every glance, every unscripted laugh across 10 weeks of footage, annotated with timestamps, as if love could be fact-checked into existence or out of it. Soo-jin forwarded links Hara never asked for, each one a fresh guess at a truth neither of them had said out loud yet. And by the third day, Hara had stopped reading the comments and started, instead, reading Jin's face across the kitchen for some kind of answer the internet couldn't give her. She did not find one. He was better at hiding things than she'd given him credit for. That, too, she would understand differently later. Standing alone in the pantry that night, surrounded by shelves of things she could name blindfolded, Hara finally let 10 weeks of performance catch up with her all at once. And Jin found her there, steady, quiet, wiping one tear from her cheek with a single finger while a cameraman ducked guiltily back around the corner behind him. "That was real," he told her of the dish of everything. "You did that, Hara." She lifted her head, face wet, which felt humiliating in a way 10 weeks of cameras never had. He wasn't looking at her with pity. There was something clearer than that in his eyes, like he could see straight past the chef and land directly on the tired woman underneath. And his hand came up, not fully, just one finger, to catch the tear before it reached her jaw. It was such a small gesture. It undid her more completely than the elimination speech would, 3 days later, in front of 300 cameras and a live studio audience. This one had no audience at all. That was exactly why it mattered. A woman does not fall apart in front of just anyone, Hara thought, quieter than her usual thoughts, almost gentle with herself for once. Consider what that means. The clip went out anyway. By morning, it was the most shared 30 seconds of the season, and neither of them yet understood how badly it was about to be used against them. It got worse before it got to the studio. A photographer caught them 2 mornings later leaving a side entrance of the apartment building. No cameras from the show anywhere in sight. Just Jin's hand at the small of her back in a gesture no producer had blocked and no script had called for. The photo ran with a headline asking, in the particular tone reserved for stories with no real answer, whether the nation's favorite fake marriage had quietly stopped being fake. Soo-jin called within the hour, not panicked exactly but close to it. "This is good, actually," Soo-jin said, in the tone she used when she meant the opposite. "Good for buzz, bad for control. You two need to decide soon what story you're telling because right now the internet is telling it for you, and the internet is not known for its restraint." Hara had no story to tell yet. She had a photograph of her own hand not pulling away, and no idea what to do with that information besides carry it into the next challenge, and hope it didn't show on her face. PD No delivered the news with the coolness of a woman protecting a brand rather than two people. Technique, passion, flawless plates, all beside the point. The judges had decided the show's central couple lacked the one thing audiences tuned in for, chemistry, a marriage that looked, even for a second, like it might be real. The pantry clip, it turned out, had been read not as tenderness but as a crack, a weak moment in a couple already suspected of being staged from the start. Bottom 2. Elimination, unless something changed the room in the next 60 seconds. Hara opened her mouth to say something safe. Jin stepped forward first. "With respect," he said, and the studio went silent. "You're wrong." This was the moment. The one already shown to you, at the very start of this story, without you knowing what it cost him to say it. He turned toward her, not the judges. He told the room what it was like to work beside someone who pushed him past the edge of his own skill, someone who did everything wrong by his own rules and made him better anyway. He called her a masterpiece of control standing next to his mess. He said learning to deserve to stand beside her was the hardest, most worthwhile work he'd done in years. He did not say he loved her. He did something more dangerous. He described, in front of a live audience and every camera in the building, exactly who she was, her patience, her precision, the particular stubbornness that made her impossible and made her extraordinary in the same breath. Hara stood very still through all of it, watching her own face on the giant screen behind the judges, unable to look away from herself long enough to school her expression into anything composed. She thought about the umbrella. She thought about the coffee, made exactly right on a morning he had no business knowing anything about her at all. She thought, distantly and with something like vertigo, that a man does not accidentally memorize a woman's coffee order, and that she had spent 10 weeks calling this arrangement a lie without once asking herself why the lie kept accidentally telling the truth. He finished. The studio held its breath, then broke into applause loud enough to rattle the lighting rig. Safe. They were safe. What Hara did not expect came 20 minutes later, backstage, in a hallway PD No clearly thought was empty. "You should know," PD No said, checking a tablet, not even looking up. "He's the reason you're both here in the first place. Choi-jin requested this pairing 3 weeks before your audition. Fought for it, actually. I don't usually let talent pick their own storylines, but the boy was relentless." A small, knowing laugh. "Business case," he called it. "I've produced 11 seasons of this show. I know a business case when I hear one, and that was not one." PD No finally looked up from the tablet, reading something in Hara's stillness that made her pause. "You did know," she said, less a question than a verdict. "Interesting. I assumed you were both in on it. That would have been the smarter play, honestly. Less mess." She tucked the tablet under her arm and started down the hallway, already moving on to whatever came next in her evening, tossing one last line over her shoulder without any particular weight behind it, as if she had no idea what she just handed over. "For what it's worth, Chef Moyo, I've had a lot of manufactured couples come through this show. I don't think I've ever produced one that started out this real on one side and this convinced of the opposite on the other." The hallway went very quiet around Hara. Every rivalry reread. Every year of magazine covers she'd assumed were aimed at outshining her reread. The reservation her old sous chef still mentioned occasionally, a strange name, a generous tip, no note left behind, suddenly had a face attached to it. The coffee, made exactly the way she liked it on the very first morning before he ever should have known. He hadn't been competing against her for 4 years. He'd been circling her for 4 years and calling it rivalry because it was the only shape he knew how to give it. The festival table set up close enough to smoke her plating area. The nights she'd watched canvas stay lit long after closing, never once wondering why a man with nothing left to prove kept working so late. He had simply been standing at his own window, 2 blocks down, watching hers right back. If you've ever found out that the person you thought was working against you was actually the one who wanted you closest the whole time, that's exactly what this next part is about. Hara walked back to the apartment that night with PD No's words sitting in her chest like a stone she hadn't asked to carry. Jin closed the door behind them, and for the first time in 10 weeks, he had nothing clever ready to say. She told him what PD No had said. She watched him decide in real time whether to lie about it. He didn't. 3 weeks, he admitted. Before the audition, I told her it made business sense, 2 rivals, built-in tension, guaranteed ratings. It wasn't a lie exactly, it just wasn't the reason. He looked at her the way he had at the elimination, except there was no audience now to perform for. I've spent 4 years finding excuses to be near your work. Reservations under names you never checked. Every festival you were booked for, somehow I was booked for too. I told myself it was rivalry because rivalry was allowed. The other thing was, not between us, not with everything our careers were supposed to be about being different from each other. You planned this, she said. Not quite an accusation, not quite anything else yet. I planned the excuse, he said. I didn't plan what happened once we were actually standing in the same kitchen. The festival, she said slowly. 5 years ago, your station right next to mine. I thought you did that to rattle me. I did it because it was the only excuse I had to stand within 10 feet of you for 8 hours. He said it plainly, without the smirk, like a man finally setting down something heavy he'd been carrying a long time. I've been finding reasons to be near your work since before either of us had a restaurant worth writing about. I told myself it was competition because competition was a thing I was allowed to want out loud. The other thing I didn't have a word for. I still don't, really. I just knew I'd rather lose to you than win against anyone else. She told him flatly that it was the most ridiculous thing she had ever heard a grown man say out loud, and he didn't argue the point. 4 years of being unbearable at her instead of simply saying something. 4 years of letting her build an entire personality around hating him, and admiring that personality from a distance the whole time, from his own window, apparently, according to the man standing in front of her now with nothing left to hide behind. I could have found out from anyone else first, she said, the anger in her voice real, and underneath it, just as real, something closer to grief. For 4 years she hadn't known to look for what had apparently been standing 2 blocks away the entire time. A tabloid, a stranger backstage. Instead I found out from PD No in a hallway like the last person to know her own life. That's the part I can't wave off, Jin. Not the wanting, the hiding. I know, he said, and didn't try to argue it away, which was, she noticed, the first time in 10 weeks he'd let an accusation land without deflecting it into a joke. He didn't have a good defense for the hiding, he told her, only a scared one. He understood if tonight the two felt like the same thing. The silence that followed held everything, her anger at being managed into something without her knowledge, and underneath it, quieter, the discovery that she wasn't actually angry about the ending, only about not having known the beginning. Your grandmother defied a kingdom for love, Hara reminded herself. Not literally, her grandmother had defied a stubborn landlord and a disapproving aunt, but it had felt like a kingdom at the time, the way she told it. Courage is the one ingredient you cannot fake. She crossed the kitchen, not because the game required it, because, for the first time in 10 weeks, nothing did. For the record, she said, close enough now to see the small scar through his eyebrow, I still think dirt is not a real ingredient. Noted Chef Moyo. And I am furious with you. I know. Genuinely, not the fun kind of furious we've been doing for the cameras, the real kind. I know that too, he said, steady, not flinching from it. You're allowed to be both, furious and still standing here. I'm also, she didn't finish it. She didn't need to. He closed the last of the distance himself, and the kiss that followed had none of the choreography the cameras had spent 10 weeks demanding of them. Just his hand at her jaw, her fingers at his collar, and the particular relief of 2 people who had been performing the same feeling for so long that neither of them had noticed it had already become true. Morning came gray and ordinary. Coffee made the way she liked it. A second batch of toast burned the way it always was. Neither of them said the word they were both very deliberately not saying yet, though it sat in the room with them, patient, taking up no space at all and every inch of it at once. You're starring, Jin said, eyes still closed, voice rough with sleep. I'm deciding whether last night was a catastrophic error in judgment. And the verdict? Undetermined, I'll need more data. That earned the real smirk, not the camera one. He pulled her an inch closer, which she allowed, purely in the interest of research. Then Soo-jin's name lit up Hara's phone, 3 calls in under a minute. The kind of urgency that never meant good news. Hara answered, listened, went still. What is it? Jin asked, already reaching for his own phone. Someone leaked the audition tapes, Hara said slowly, the early ones from 3 weeks before we were cast. She looked up at him, the coffee mug forgotten in her hand. PD No's office, your original pitch, it's already online. Somewhere across the city, a headline was writing itself in real time. A story about to reach a few million more people than PD No had ever intended, and neither of them yet knew whether it would end their careers or make them. Jin was already dressed by the time Hara finished reading the third article, each one worse than the last, each one certain it had found the real story before either of the two people actually living. It had a chance to decide what the real story was. "I need to call PD no," he said, jaw tight in a way she hadn't seen since the night of the fight over bibimbap and dirt. "Before she calls us, I want to hear how bad this actually is from someone who isn't trying to sell it to me." "And if it's bad," Hara said, "if this ends the show, ends both our restaurants' goodwill with half the country that's decided you're a liar and I'm either a fool or in on it." He crossed the kitchen and took the phone gently out of her hand, setting it face down on the counter, the way he'd once nudged a pot of ribs toward her without asking, an offering instead of an argument. "Then we handle it the way we handled the fusion dish," he said, "together with 30 minutes on the clock and no time to be precious about whose fault it is." He paused, something more uncertain moving under the steadiness he was clearly working to hold onto. "I should have told you myself, weeks ago, before some leaked tape did it for me in a headline neither of us gets to write. I'm sorry it happened this way. I'm not sorry it happened." "Ask me again in an hour whether I forgive you for the delivery," Hara said. "Right now I need coffee and a plan and possibly a lawyer." "I already have 2 of those things covered." "Which 2? "The coffee," he said, "and the lawyer. You're on your own for forgiveness." She almost laughed, which surprised her more than the leak had. Outside, the city was already moving, already talking, already deciding what kind of story this was going to become without either of them in the room to argue back. They didn't wait for PD No's team to write something safe for the network first. By the afternoon, they sat in front of a single camera in the back office of Min's table, no crew, no script, and told the truth in plain language, that he'd asked for this pairing and waited 4 years too long to say why, that she hadn't known and had every right to be angry about the years it took him to admit it, and that whatever was happening between them now wasn't a storyline anyone had built for them. It was just true, and they were done letting other people be the ones to say so first. The clip did not perform the way panic and tabloid guesswork usually do. It performed the way the truth sometimes does, when people are tired of being sold something and are handed something plain instead. Reservations at Min's table doubled by the end of that week, not because people wanted to see whether Chef Choi might be there, but because they wanted to taste the cooking of the woman who told several million strangers, without flinching, that she was still deciding whether to forgive someone. Some evenings, months later, Hara still stood at the tall windows of her restaurant after closing, looking 2 blocks down at the small yellow glow of canvas. She no longer needed the lights off behind her to do it. Jin knew she watched. She knew he watched back. Neither of them called it rivalry anymore, and for the first time in 5 years, neither of them needed a camera in the room to be honest about what it actually was. If there's one thing worth sitting with after a story like this, it isn't the marriage, real or fake. It's the 4 years he spent circling her and calling it competition, because competition was a thing he was allowed to want out loud, and the truth, for a long time, was. How many people do exactly that, turn the thing they want most into the thing they claim to be fighting, just so it's safer to keep close? Maybe you already know someone doing it right now. Maybe for a while, without quite admitting it to yourself, you were the one doing it. Tell me in the comments. I think the answer says more about you than it does about either of them. If this is the kind of story that meant something to you, subscribe now to Afro Diaries by D. There's a lot more like it here. And if you know someone who has ever loved a person by pretending to compete with them instead of just saying it, send them this one. Not for the channel, for them.